Okay, how are we looking there?
Great.
Okay, let me see if I can. Okay. All right. Hi, I'm Michelle Wietek-Stephens from UP Native Plants, and today we're going to talk about UP butterflies and moths and their relationship with native plants. First, a tidbit about my nursery. We're a native plant nursery located just south of Marquette. It's operated by my family. We do have three part-time staff this year. We're a web-based business, so please don't drive to the nursery and show up and say, "Hey, I'd like to shop." We are not set up for shopping, and half the time we're not here. And I'll post the plant sale list about why we're not here at the end of it. But I don't know how many times I've been in another town in the UP and gotten a call from somebody who says, "Hey, I'm in your driveway. I was here to shop." We can't do that. We're not staffed for that and we're not set up for that. So you can find us at plant sales all around the UP, but our website is always open for shopping. Browse to your heart's delight, and we'll set up a pickup time that's convenient for both of us. We also do wholesale orders for restoration projects. We're trying to make it easy for the UP to wild up their world. Okay, so today we're going to talk about native plants for UP moths and butterflies. I'm not an insect expert, but the relationship between native plants and insects is something that interests me a lot. So I tend to try to pick up those facts when I can find them and do research on them. Most of the pictures in the presentation are my pictures or pictures of things that I've actually seen, but didn't get to take my own personal shots of because yeah, sometimes they don't hold still for me. We're going to take a look at why butterflies and moths are important to our world, why what we plant matters to them, um, and some pairings between native plants for UP moths and butterflies. And then once you get those plants in the ground, how do you maintain that planting so that you're getting the full benefit for moths and butterflies? We love butterflies. As a culture, we love butterflies. They're pretty, they're colorful, they hang out with our flowers and almost like they're some sort of fancy accessory for our flower gardens. We put them on kids' toys, we put them on wallpaper, we put them on throw pillows, stickers for our water bottles. Butterflies are everywhere. We love butterflies. We love the imagery of them. It's a just a long-standing relationship that we've had with them. Um, we have also come to value them as pollinators. And so part of the effort to save our pollinators also includes butterflies because we know that they pollinate. And so that gives us a practical reason to try to conserve them and protect them and help them out. Another reason that they are valuable is that the caterpillars form the basis of a lot of the food web. So they are an important component of our world, um, but something that gets a little bit more overlooked are moths. We don't generally think of moths as pollinators. There's no moth wallpaper that I'm aware of. There's very few moth kids' toys. You know, they're just overlooked. They hang out at night. People think they're brown and they're boring and that they don't do much. And so we don't give moths the same sort of love that we give to butterflies, but they are very, very important, and I wanted to highlight that a little bit today. So there's 700 species of butterfly in North America, approximately. There's 4,000 species of bee in North America, and there's 13,000 species of moths, at least. We're still discovering new moths in North America. Um, so just by sheer numbers, you know that they are having a big impact on our ecosystem. Moths are significant pollinators. They form the basis of the food chain just by their sheer numbers. Tons of birds eat moths, caterpillars. I saw a nature documentary where grizzly bears were climbing into the Rocky Mountains for hours to get to these rock fields where moths would hide during the day, and they would spend the day flipping rocks to dig up moths. So you know they're nutritious if a bear is going to climb a mountain to go and harvest moths all day. So they're a great source of nutrition for a lot of different critters. And because they are at night, apparently I missed a talk about conserving bats, but because they generally travel at night, they are a great bat food and very important for that part of our ecology. The picture shows the maple leaf roller. And if you look at your fallen leaves in the fall, you will just find thousands of these in the maple forests of the UP. And they're kind of unobtrusive. You might not notice them, but if you start looking, you'll just see these rolled leaves all over the place. And that's that little yellowish moth. But there are thousands and thousands of them. And just the sheer amount of insect food that's laying on the floor in our woods in the fall is just amazing because of this one little moth. So they're definitely important for our local ecosystem. When we think of pollinators, we tend to think of bees and butterflies and the things that are on wallpaper. Um, we don't generally think of moths as much, but studies have shown that moths do 50% of the pollination, and that night shift pollination is very important. They did a study on apple trees where they excluded moths from certain clusters of flowers by putting a bag over them for the nighttime and only letting them being pollinated during the day. And they found out that either the fruit didn't set because it didn't get adequately pollinated, or the fruit was small or it was misshapen. So the moth pollination is very important for our crops. Both locally and around the country, and also for pollinating all of the native plants and everything else that needs pollination out there. Studies have shown that moths are more effective at pollination than bees. So bees are fuzzy. They're fuzzier than butterflies. They tend to carry it's scales, but it looks like fuzz. They tend to carry more pollen than a butterfly does on that fuzz. Their bees are also fuzzy, but when a bee is getting pollen, a lot of times they're using that pollen. So they're scraping the pollen down into their is it bags, saddle bags, whatever. The bees use to carry the pollen on their legs. They're collecting that pollen, they're using that pollen to feed their larvae. As far as we know, the moths aren't using the pollen. There's a lot of lack of study of moths, but they're not using the pollen, so it's just mostly laying on them and it gets transferred to the next flower fairly easily. They also fly a lot farther than bees. So bees have a range. They set up a nest site and they spend their season provisioning that nest site. They only fly a certain distance to collect pollen to bring back to that nest site. For some of the wider ranging bees, that could maybe be a mile, but for the smaller bees, it might be 50 yards, and they spend their whole life within that 50 yards. So if I have native plants here on my property and they are producing pollen, how am I going to get that pollen from my foxglove beard tongue to cross with somebody else's foxglove beard tongue? It's not going to be bees that are going to transmit those genetics, but moths might be able to. There are moths that fly from southern Michigan to Central America and do a full migration. Moths can fly for miles wherever they think they can find the plants that they need. So we haven't studied it as much as we've studied butterfly migrations because, again, they hang out at night and we tend to just ignore them. But moths can transmit pollen over great distances. There are even plants that are specialized to be pollinated just by moths. For example, my family and I just got back from hiking in the Las Vegas area, and we saw a Joshua tree forest there, which is pollinated solely by yucca moths. And if there's no moths, there's no pollination happening of those plants. So plants are very appreciative, and some of them have specialized and evolved just to have these pollination relationships with moths. And my personal opinion, but I don't think that butterflies have much on them in terms of looks. There are a lot of moths. They may not be quite as colorful, but they certainly have a lot of really interesting shapes. And um, just look to them that they're a lot more interesting, I think, than butterflies, but that's just me. All right. So butterflies and moths, they are both valuable. They lay hundreds of eggs, and very few of those make it to adulthood. And that's because they get eaten by a whole lot of things. So plants use the energy from the sun. Um, Caterpillars consume the plants, and then thousands of things consume caterpillars. They're eaten by spiders, there are other insects, wasps, um, lots of types of birds, amphibians, reptiles, rodents, the bears that we were talking about. Uh, Later, when they turn into adults, bears, bats, dragonflies, all of those prey on caterpillars who are getting food from the plants, which contain the energy from the sun. Some of you are probably familiar with this statistic, but caterpillars are extremely important to songbirds. 96% of songbirds, according to Talame, use insects to feed their young, and most of those are caterpillars, because caterpillars are the tube steak of the bird world. So they don't have utensils, they can't chop up a hot dog, but caterpillars are a good substitution. They're soft and squishy. I don't know if you've ever seen birds, I'm sure you have, feed their young, but it's not delicate. They take that insect and they ram it down the thing's throat. So if there's legs and wings and crunchy bits sticking out, that's going to be awkward. So caterpillars are great for that. You can stuff it down a baby and take off and go get another caterpillar. They are short on crunchy bits. They're a good source of nutrients. They come in a variety of sizes, so birds will actually time their migration so that they're hitting their food nest areas at the time that caterpillars are the right size, and the bigger birds will come later so that they can make use of the caterpillars that have sized up, and the little birds will come sooner so that they can get the little caterpillars. So it's a tight relationship. Um, Takes 6 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one brood of chickadees. That is a lot of trips to the nest. I'm glad I'm not a bird. So every 2 to 3 minutes, all day, every day, those parents have to be bopping out, grabbing a caterpillar, coming back to the nest, and shoving it down somebody's throat. They can't go a mile down the road. They can't, the next neighborhood over from me is Scandia. They can't go to Scandia, get a caterpillar, and come back. It's going to take too long. Somebody's going to starve. So they have to have tens of thousands of caterpillars right around so that they can make that timing of hitting their nest every 2 to 3 minutes. That's a lot of caterpillars that have to live right in your yard if you want a nest full of chickadees. And um, the caterpillars specialize and eat native plants. So you have to have native plants local to you right in your yard if you want to have a nest full of chickadees. And that 6 to 9,000 number is just to get the baby birds fledged. They continue to feed for another 21 days after the fledging, and that's more insects, probably more caterpillars. It's not just chickadees, a whole variety of birds, and not even just songbirds make use of the caterpillar bonanza. So butterflies and moths, they're cool, they're amazing, they're beautiful, they fuel the world, and they also pollinate. So we should garden for them, right? Butterfly gardening is not new. We've been doing it since at least the 1800s, or it's been popular since at least the 1800s. But the point of traditional butterfly gardening was to attract butterflies to your yard so that they could decorate your yard for you and you could appreciate their fluttering. It wasn't really to provide them with what they need. For example, this plant list from Better Homes and Gardens features a non-native butterfly bush and then a whole list of non-native uh, plants or cultivars of native plants. So the problem with that is that those plants are there for us and they may attract butterflies, but they're not really giving the butterflies what they need. So the non-native butterfly bush may offer some nectar, It can also be problematic because either it doesn't grow up here in the UP or in some other places where they plant it, it grows too well and becomes invasive. But either way, it's not hosting the caterpillars of the butterflies that you're trying to attract. So it's sort of an empty promise. Here's some nectar. Have a nice day. The double hollyhocks, we like petals, so we breed plants to have lots of petals, but um, those are not really accessible to the pollinators. They can't get to the nectar, they can't get to the pollen. They may look and smell like valuable flowers, and so a butterfly may come and spend an afternoon fluttering around those double hollyhocks, but it's not going to get what it needs. And then the thing on the left, black-eyed Susans, really? Those are not black-eyed Susans. They've messed with the reproductive structures, they've messed with the coloration, and I'm pretty sure that the people at Proven Winners or whoever developed these did not look at how that was affecting nectar production. They didn't look at how that was affecting the ultraviolet markings that insects use to find the nectar. They just developed that as eye candy for people and then recommended that you plant it for butterflies as well. So gardens like that are not really helping the butterflies. At best, they're offering a little nectar. At worst, they are wasting the butterflies' time. And some of those butterflies and moths only live for a few weeks. They're out there, they might be stopping for a nectar snack. They have to reproduce, they're going to die. If they spend an afternoon fluttering around a garden that isn't offering them any resources, um, opportunities to lay their eggs, they've wasted a significant portion of their life trying to get nectar out of a double hollyhock. So what you need to do if you want to plant for native plants is think about what the butterflies and the moths need. We can still be pretty, it can still be attractive to the human eye, but we need to think a little bit more broadly than just planting double hollyhocks. Nectar is not just sugar water, so even when you're planting nectar plants, you want to plant native plants because there are other compounds in there, and pollinators will pick their favorites that have the nectar that suits them and use those primarily, and then only after those are used up or are not available will they go to less desirable nectar plants. Native plants have ultraviolet nectar guides that we can't see, but that butterflies can. And they're evolved to use those to efficiently find their food. The plants get pollinated out of the deal, and so that's a relationship that needs to be fostered. But ultimately, nectar is just snack food for the adults, and butterflies can get, and moths can get nectar from non-native plants or from other plants. It's preferable if it's native, but what really matters are some of the other aspects that native plants offer, particularly host plants. So caterpillars specialize to eat certain native plants, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. You do want that nectar to be native if possible. And then on the right, for the 5 people that I can see on my screen who have their video on, who's heard of butterflies using plants medicinally?
I'm just listening to a whatever you call it, a seminar or a Zoom thing. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're also unmuted, Karen. Hi. Okay. So anyways,
I'll
butterflies.
just say that I have not. I don't think many of us have, right?
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Um, oops. So I will talk about that a little bit, but let me talk about pollination first. Okay, larval, or rather larval host plants. So one of the main reasons to plant native plants for butterflies and moths is because their larvae, the caterpillars, need specific native plants. And that's because the plants don't particularly want to be eaten, or at least they don't want to be eaten enough that it impairs their ability to use that energy from the sun for their own reproduction. So they're trying to limit or eliminate getting eaten by caterpillars and all the other hungry things in the world. And so they have evolved physical and chemical defenses in order to limit that herbivory. So an example of a physical defense would be when you take a milkweed leaf and you snap it, you get that white sap that oozes out. Those are chemicals in the plant that when they're exposed to air, they turn into latex, which is a rubbery stuff that glues up the mouth parts of the caterpillars. So when the caterpillars are chewing on the leaf, the latex oozes out. It might stop the caterpillar from eating, possibly even kill the caterpillar, and then the plant has reduced being eaten. Chemical defenses would be the chemicals that the milkweed produces that make it toxic or at least distasteful to things that would eat it. So the monarch caterpillars want to eat the milkweed because nothing else is eating the milkweed because it's sticky and it tastes bad. So monarch caterpillars have evolved to overcome those defenses. So that guy right there has just chewed halfway through the stem of that leaf, causing it to fold over. It's called trenching. And he's severed half of the tubes that carry the latex chemicals, and the other half have bent over, and he stopped the flow of latex into that leaf. Now he can eat the leaf in peace, and also he's kind of underneath it, so he's got a little bit of protection from birds as well. So that is an evolution in response to the defense of the plants, and they have specialized to deal with the physical defense of the milkweed plants. They've also evolved to be able to deal with the chemicals that otherwise make milkweed unpalatable. Not only are they able to tolerate those chemicals, but they use them to be toxic to the things that would eat them. And then they develop the bright colors to warn birds that, hey, I taste like milkweed, don't eat me. So monarchs have specialized, and that's good when there's milkweed because it means they get the milkweed buffet all to themselves. It's bad when there's no milkweed because then monarch caterpillars can't eat lilacs, they can't eat turf grass, they can't eat common tansy. So if there's not milkweed, they can't eat. All right, here's the medicinals thing that people have maybe not heard of. I think you guys have had Nancy Lawson on your seminars before. So Nancy Lawson is known as the Humane Gardener, and she is just a wonderful author, very inspiring. She's really changed the way I think about certain aspects of native plant gardening, particularly white-tailed deer. But one of her interesting articles that I came across was that she saw a monarch butterfly in her garden by her mailbox one day on a dead stem. And she thought it was just hanging out. But when she observed it, it was licking the stem. So she did a little research and determined that it was dissolving the chemicals out of that dry plant material and then licking those chemicals up from the dry plant material. And it was doing this diligently as it would pursue nectar. So it was obviously very important to it. And it turns out that a lot of butterflies collect chemicals from dry plant material to use in their reproduction. It either helps them produce the pheromones that they need to attract a mate, or it helps them, they can provide chemicals that their mates need to produce the eggs and that they're going to be laying. So it helps with butterfly reproduction. She was the first person to really verify and prove that monarch butterflies did this. It had been observed in some other species, but it was not known as a behavior in monarch butterflies. And it's a very cool article. I definitely recommend checking it out. But the point is that part of butterfly gardening is to leave the stems and the leaves, just like you would, it's sort of a rallying call now to leave the leaves. So that's yet another reason to leave the stems and the leaves, is that they look dead to us. We call it dead material, or we're going to clean up the garden by cutting out the dead material. It's just dry. It's not, its life usefulness is not over. So it doesn't need to be cleaned up. Just because it's not pretty to us anymore doesn't mean it's not useful. Those dead stems, dry stems, are being used by little bees as nest sites. They're being used for chemicals by butterflies. Fireflies are sheltering in the leaves underneath. So leave that dry plant material as part of your garden, as a valuable part of your garden. Okay. So if you're gardening for butterflies and moths, you want native plants for nectar because they're going to have the accessible flower structures that the insects have evolved to be able to access. They're going to have ultraviolet markings that will help them find that food. They're going to have the proper nutrition. Native host plants are going to provide the food for the caterpillars that are specialized to use them. And then the native plants have the chemicals that butterflies need for reproduction, even if they are no longer what we consider to be living and pretty. Nectar is easy. They can get nectar, some amount of nectar, even from non-native plants, although native is better. So you want to focus on the host plants. And then while you're doing that, you're probably going to end up providing the plants that have the beneficial chemicals as well. So specifically, butterflies that are found in the UP, monarchs, obviously milkweed. People know that you need to plant milkweed for the monarchs. Our nursery offers 4 different kinds: common, rose or swamp milkweed, world milkweed, and butterfly milkweed. But there are also 10 other different kinds of milkweed that are native to Michigan. So there are other options as well. The only thing I would say is don't plant tropical milkweed. Don't plant a milkweed that is not native to Michigan if it'll even grow up here. But tropical milkweed has been widely planted around the country way outside of its range. And the problem is that it doesn't shut down its flower production. So common milkweed up here will stop so that it has time to produce seeds. So it'll stop flowering and switch to seed production. And that means that it's no longer a nectar source for the monarch butterflies, and it's no longer actively growing tender shoots that they want to lay their eggs on. And all those things help trigger the monarch butterflies to migrate and to get the heck out of here before the frost comes. And if you plant tropical milkweed that stays fresh and perky with flowers way into September, then the monarchs might stick around too long. So make sure that the milkweeds that you plant are native to Michigan, preferably to the UP. If you want UP native milkweed, stick with the common or the swamp. All right. American ladies and painted ladies look almost identical. There's a little tiny white spot on the American ladies' wings that the painted ladies don't have, and there's also a little bit of difference in the eye spots. But otherwise, they're kind of difficult to tell apart, especially since they don't hold still. But the American lady is a little more specialized. They focus on pearly everlasting and pussy toes. So if you want American ladies, make sure you incorporate some of those. The painted ladies have a wider range of host plants, prairie sage, and a bunch of other plants in addition to the pearly everlasting and pussy toes. Fritillaries. The great spangled fritillary and its relatives use violets, all kinds of violets. So violets are not weeds. Violets are valuable and are something that should be encouraged in your lawn if you have it, or underneath all your other plants. We have a UP specific subspecies of great spangled fritillary that is just ours, which is pretty cool. So you want lots of violets so that you can have your UP specific fritillary. I forget what the name is, named after some guy who discovered it. It's tan rather than orange, which is, typical. But it's still pretty cool that we have our very own UP subspecies of butterfly. I wanted to bring up the red admiral. This is a picture from our greenhouse, and we had red admirals hatch out in our greenhouse because we let clearweed grow underneath our greenhouse benches last year. That is a member of the nettle family. We let it grow there because it's not a stinging member of the nettle family, but it is a member of the nettle family, and it's a host plant for red admiral butterflies. Um, and it's a reminder to tolerate plants that humans find annoying. So nettles are often viewed with a certain amount of animosity. In addition to being edible if you handle them the right way, they're also the host plant for the red admiral butterfly, so give them some love too. Tiger swallowtails is a generalist butterfly. I put that on there because they're very popular and people are interested in them, but they will host on a whole variety of things. So you don't necessarily need to plant stuff for them. I included checker spots because checker spots have an interesting range. The Harris checker spot is very specific to flat-topped white aster. You have to have flat-topped white aster to have Harris's checker spots. Not New England aster, not smooth blue aster. It's got to be flat-topped white aster. The Baltimore checker spot is a little less specific. They want turtle head. But they also use willows in the spring. So they overwinter as a larva. They eat the turtle head in the fall when the turtle heads are large. And then in the spring, before the turtle heads have started growing, they complete their life cycle on willow, which is a woody plant. So it doesn't have to grow its structure every spring and it can leaf out sooner. The silvery checker spot is a lot more general. A variety of asters, native sunflowers, not the domestic kind that are big and fuzzy, but the native sunflowers and black-eyed Susans, and some other things. So that's butterflies in the UP. I didn't cover them all. There's a lot of species, and there are guidebooks for that I'll reference at the end. So for moths, there's even more species, and there's a lot less research about their specific host plants. So I'm going to punt you to the native plant finder for the National Wildlife Federation. You can put in your zip code and you can bring up lists of the best plants for hosting moths and butterflies. But since most of the species are moths in the UP, most of that listing is going to end up referencing moths. You can flip that list and you can get the plants that host just one type of moth so that you can plant a few things for the specialists as well. But in general, moths host on native trees. So native trees and shrubs. So when you're replacing those large components of your landscape, make sure that you're replacing it with something that's native to our region. Goldenrods are extremely important for moths, both because they're host plants for a lot of different species of moths, something like 136 different species of moths. They're also a great nectar plant for moths. So goldenrods are extremely important. Native sunflowers, and when I say native sunflower, I mean the thing in the picture, not the ones that have the 4-inch blooms that are native to the prairie, or worse, the cultivars that have been bred to have giant blooms. These are native sunflowers. These are the things that host the caterpillars and provide the nectar for the adults. Wild strawberry and other members of the rose family, asters, and members of the black-eyed Susan family are also very important to moths. Oops, sorry about that. Clicked on the link accidentally. Okay, so if you don't want to do all that research yourself, we do have garden kits that are specific for butterflies. We have a butterfly host plant garden kit where you can just get 38 plants that are host plants for UP butterflies. And new this year, we have a moon garden kit, which is host plants and nectar plants for moths. So I looked at some books for moths for the area. I looked at that National Wildlife Federation website, and I included plants that I have observed the moths using in our area. Things like common milkweed and evening primrose, and stiff goldenrod are things that I've seen a lot of moth activity on. So we do have pre-made garden kits if you don't want to do all the research yourself for moths, for butterflies, and then we have one for monarchs as well that provides full season nectar to support monarchs. Couple of words on maintaining your butterfly planting. So you can add a puddler. So a puddler is a wet spot on the ground. You can just have, you know, don't be so hasty to fix your hose leak or something like that. Or you can put a pan out with rocks or gravel or bury a pan that has some moisture in it. It's not really the moisture that the butterflies and moths are after, it's the minerals. So again, the wet soil is a source of the minerals that they need for their life cycles. And if you do build a puddler and you look up the instructions on how to do that, or you get one of our garden kits that comes with instructions on how to do that, it'll say to add a pinch of compost or a pinch of manure or a pinch of salt or something that's going to dissolve some minerals into that moisture because that's what the butterflies are after. You can add a sun rock because butterflies are cold-blooded and sometimes they like to warm up those wings before launching off for the day, especially in our shoulder seasons. And add native grasses or sedges. And that is because there are skipper butterflies and a number of the other small butterflies and a lot of moths that use native grasses and sedges as host plants. And so often native grasses and sedges get overlooked in the garden because the native plant movement says, oh, grass is bad. Native grasses are good, they're important, they're essential to various species of moths and butterflies, and they also offer shelter to other species of moths and butterflies. Either moths can hide there at night or butterflies can perch there when it's windy, and it also gives a good place to pupate or hang a chrysalis. Again, leave those leaves and stems. And then the final point is accept some ugly. So if you're gardening for moths and butterflies, your leaves are going to have holes, and that's good. That's what you're going for. This picture on the right, I was at a farmer's market and I was chatting with this lady. And as I was chatting with her, she was idly picking at my pussy toes and trying to get that white stuff off my pussy toes. And that white stuff is your baby butterflies. So the American lady butterfly that I mentioned earlier lays its eggs. When the caterpillar hatches out, it builds this silk structure and knits the leaves together, and then it grows in there. And it comes out at night to eat, but during the day it hides inside this silk structure and it poops in there and it sheds its skin and I agree, it looks nasty, but that's your baby butterflies. So I had another client, very enthusiastic native plant gardener, who told me she picked all that stuff off her plants because she thought it was moldy. So please don't pluck the American lady butterfly caterpillars off your plants. They look ugly, but they'll hatch out, they'll turn into butterflies, and your plants will recover. Okay, so we talked about the value of the butterflies and the moths, and in case anybody needed convincing, but I'm pretty sure this audience is already convinced. Well, we want to garden for their needs as well as ours, and then go easy on the cleanup. Don't pluck off the moldy bits. The moldy bits are butterflies. These are some books that I love for reference. Gardening for Moths, an often overlooked topic. It's a really good book. It also describes how to build a moth sheet. So if you want to observe the moths that are coming to your garden, because the reason we don't think about moths very much is they fly around at night. We're either not awake or we can't see them. They don't photograph well. Trust me, I have tried. It's dark out. It's really hard to get your iPhone to focus under those low light conditions. So you can do a moth sheet and then you can have the moths come to you for an evening and you can take some pictures. The two field guides are those that are useful because they identify what's in the UP. The one on the right has range maps for each of the butterflies. It's specific to Michigan, but you can look at the range maps and figure out which ones of those are actually found in the UP. I like the yellow one because it has really clear pictures on how to identify the different species that look like each other, with arrows and the little details circled so that it's easy for me. The blue book is just specific to the Great Lakes ecoregion, which is really nice. So you know that if it's in that book, that it's a butterfly or moth that is in our ecoregion. And I like both of those books because they list the larval host plants, so you can find out what the caterpillars are eating. That used to frustrate me to no end when I was a kid, because I would flip open a guidebook, find out what some insect was, and there would be absolutely no information. No information about how it interacted with the world, no information about what it ate, no information about its life in any way, shape, or form. So I'm really glad that the guidebooks now are addressing those topics a little bit. Couple of more sources of information. I came across this artist. Uh, Her website is melbryarts.com. She does these awesome posters of the relationships between specific native plants and all these critters. So it's a really good visual on the importance of native plants. I know some of you are involved in education, and so she's a really good resource for that. And I do have permission for her to use her imagery in my educational materials. So check out that website. She has New England aster, she has Virginia creeper, and she has goldenrod. I think it's Canada goldenrod. Most of what she does is trees, but she is working on more of the native flower associations. And then in the bottom right, there's a new landscape designer in the UP. We have a need for more people who do garden design with native plants, and she's been in contact with me quite a bit. And so I said that I would get the word out if anybody's looking for native plant garden design or help with landscaping. And then I'm going to throw this up while we take questions. This is why I'm not at the nursery if you stop by. So that's our plant sale list. And with that, that is the presentation. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead.
I do right away.
Okay.
Where is Mary Richardson located?
She operates out of Manistee and Munising. So I think she lives in Manistee and her significant other lives in Munising. So she spends a great deal of time in both.
Okay, thank you.
But she's willing to travel throughout the UP.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so great. Okay. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and if you do have a question, please feel free to type it in. From Teresa Shoup. How do you identify plants that you might have inherited? For example, Rudbeckia, whether it's native or not.
That can be tricky. So if you go to it depends on your level of comfort keying things out. If you go to Michigan Flora and you type in the scientific name, sometimes the common name will get you what you need. And then so like if you type in New England aster, you get the New England aster page. If you go to the top and you click on the asters, it'll show the link. You click on asters, it'll give you the key of plant characteristics, and then you can look at how to key out that plant if you're comfortable with all those botanical terms. It's a little tricky if you're not familiar with all that stuff, but that's a good resource. That's probably the gold standard for how to tell if your plant matches the definition of the native plant. That is, the cultivars are difficult because they will resemble the parent plants, but maybe not necessarily perfectly.
It's a lot of
Wouldn't one way perhaps be to see if anything's eating it? Couldn't that be a clue anyway?
Yeah, if nothing's eating it, then that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Ronnie Mae Kruger. Is it safe to assume that wild milkweed found in northern Wisconsin would also be native and safe to use here? And here, I suspect, is the UP.
Yeah, we're part of the ecoregion. We share an ecoregion with northern Wisconsin. So that is, probably adapted for the UP. Better to gather your seeds from closer if possible, but there's probably not going to be anything wrong with that. That's a question that I ponder a lot is, we're deliberately with this native plant movement, we're deliberately moving genotypes of native plants around perhaps a little farther than they would otherwise go, especially when we order them from southern Minnesota or nurseries in Illinois or whatever. Um, but part of the problem with human effects on the environment is that we've shut down the natural ways that seeds would migrate. There's no longer any big buffalo migrations. If you have a southern Michigan plant that might have spread around the bottom of Lake Michigan and then come up to the UP, now it's going to run into Chicago and it's never going to get up here. So there is some human migration of plant seeds. There always has been. Uh, Native Americans moved plants also for their own reasons and still do. And people are part of the native plant migration. We just have to be mindful about it. But I think that northern Wisconsin is pretty close to the UP. Don't tell them I said that.
I just pasted the link that Michelle mentioned to those ecoregions that's on the United States Environmental Protection Agency website. So you can check out how we relate to other ecoregions.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who's brought native plants from mid-Wisconsin and Minnesota and merrily planted them in my garden. And also have wondered if I was doing the right thing. A friend of mine did say once that it's important to consider whether these plants have a good role in the landscape. And what she said was that the birds here and the bugs here, they know these plants. And so you are adding value, and, also, I think, Michelle, you once said that you have, is it little blue stem that is from downstate, and then little blue stem that's from up here, and the little blue stem that's from up here is more vigorous. So my hope is that the less vigorous ones will, over time, either adapt or die.
Yep, that is something I wonder how long it's going to take for some of the genetics that we move up here to become truly Uper.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
human involvement in plant migration is fairly normal. We just need to make sure that we're not overwhelming our UP genotypes with plants from other areas and that we're doing it mindfully about what we're bringing up.
Yes. Well, and some of the plants have become so rare up here, right, that collecting seeds from the wild would be pretty challenging.
I get a lot of requests for plants to ship plants to New England because some of the things that I have are extinct in their
Oh
native
my.
ranges out east and or very close to extinct, and so they want to try and reintroduce them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you should be very careful about harvesting seeds from natural areas because the seeds would be doing their job in those natural areas. That's why it's great that that you can get so many plants from Michelle because she's carefully collected them from UP sources in a good way, and you've got those genotypes that we know live here because they have been.
Mhm.
And the timing is right. They're evolved to match our UP timing, assuming that our UP timing stays uh, as it should. But a lot of the things that you might get from other places might bloom at the wrong time or might produce berries at the wrong time. I have a New England aster that's from southern Michigan, and that thing is so late. It is always touch and go whether it's gonna bloom before the frost comes. Whereas our Scandia New England aster, um, blooms with plenty of time.
Michelle, one thing I wanted to point out, on your website, you have, as you mentioned, the collections that you've done the work on, and you've got a lot of good information there too. And you have some good categories. So if people go to like I forget whether it's shop or buy or whatever, but if they go to that tab, you've got some cool things like short stuff that people might like need to know to plant short stuff. And your plants of significant size. I imagine once you finally get rid of that freaking knotweed in your yard and you wanted something to shade you from somebody else, your plants of significant size would do that. And then related to your talk today, you've got great host plants listed so people can go there. And your site is really good for educational purposes too. I've learned a lot from going to your site. And then some of us might have septic or drain fields, so you've got a tab for that too. So I appreciate all that you've put your knowledge into a usable form that can help people continue to learn as they continue on their learning journey here.
It was always a question when I started out and I would look at other people's websites at their native plants that they had for sale, and very few of them would tell you, why should I plant this? And so I am always trying to provide the reasons for why you would plant this. You might want to plant this because it's short and you need to keep short plants in your front yard. You might want to plant this because it's tall and you need the privacy screen. You might want to plant this because it blooms in the spring. So I am trying to make it easy for people to answer the question, why would I want to plant this?
That's great. Good job.
Thank you.
You also have a nice blog that people, if they sign up for, can. I know it's a great little escape for me when your blog pops up, and I'm like, oh, I can like stop scrolling this stuff, and I can just focus on some nice thing. And you don't know what you don't know, which is why your blog is great. What is the plant that looks like Virginia creeper? You did a blog on that once. I really appreciated.
Yeah, it's woodbine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that happens to me a lot. I will collect the seeds for something that I'm sure I know what it is. I mean, Virginia creeper, obviously it's Virginia creeper. And then I will go to put it on the website after it's germinated, and I will go to look up the scientific name to make sure I've got it and discover that there's something that looks exactly like it. And now I have to figure out if what I have is Virginia creeper or woodbine. So that often delays me selling things for a year while I try to verify exactly what I have.
We appreciate your diligence in that. Another resource that people may or may not know about is you can get the flora of the Upper Peninsula, which Steve Chatty put out. And because so many plants have the northern extent of their range in those southern tiers of counties, it's, you have a lot less to look through when you look through that flora of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to help you figure out those fine details and learn what you didn't know, right?
Okay, yeah, I will be in the Keweenaw twice this year. So we're going to be there on a Tuesday, June 17th, for the Keweenaw by Wild Bird RAC fundraiser plant sale. And then we're going to be there again in Calumet on September 13th for their Saturday farmers market.
Michelle, do you know specifically where that wild bird sale is going to be?
The Houghton Farmers Market will be
Houghton Farmers Market. Okay, thanks.
And then if you want to do the pre-order for that, find the Keweenaw Wild Bird REC on Facebook, and there should be a link pinned there for their order form.
That's nice. That makes it possible for people to order from you and then not have to make the 5-hour round trip.
Right.
Not that we don't love to visit Marquette.
I know but everybody's busy and it's a haul. So yeah, we
Mhm.
will be up there twice. So if you're ordering from the Wild Bird, Q&O Wild Bird Rec, then uh, order everything you can through her. But if there's other things that our website offers that you want to deliver, we can do a delivery to that sale as well, provided it's ready in time. It's a very late year. We still have a lot of snow on the ground. All of our last winter's stock is still frozen under the snowbank. I haven't even begun to be able to thaw it yet. So, um, whether we have things thawed out for a June 17 date, I'm not sure yet.
Well, you're getting a lot of love in the chat there, Michelle, if you haven't been following
Yeah.
this. So, and
Mhm.
another thing I wanted to point out in the chat is I mentioned that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife has these series, Managing Forests as Habitat in a Changing World. It's a panel discussion series. And I put the link in the chat for that too. I think they record them. So that's another valuable resource for people. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.